Yeah, I'm early. What are you going to do? I finished the member reading and I'm just sitting here going, I'm not going to just sit around for 10 more minutes. I'll just start. Welcome to another DragonLance Saga review episode. This is Lenara's Reapember the 27th. My name is Adam, and today I'm going to give you my review of Legacy of Steel by Mary H. Herbert. I would like to take a moment and thank the DL Saga members and invite you to consider becoming one by visiting the link in the description below. You can even pick up DragonLance gaming materials using my affiliate links. Now, this is my perspective only. If yours differs, that's okay. Share your thoughts in chat if you're watching it live, and if you're watching this after the fact, put them in the comments below. I always love to hear what other people think about these sometimes great, sometimes really horrible novels from the Dragonlance Saga. So thank you for your involvement in this, in whatever way you're going to participate. Thanks for tuning in live. Chris, if you're actually here or not, I don't know. But all right, so here it is. The Legacy of Steel is the whole novel is about Sara Dunstan, who is the surrogate mother of Steel Brightblade, which is the son of Kidiar Uthmatar and Sturm Brightblade. And of course, that'll happen during the Summer of Chaos. This is after the Chaos War, and she is sort of mourning the loss of Steel and beating herself up. And this is something, as a parent, I totally get. You always blame yourself for your kids' failings or troubles. It's just something that if you love them, you don't want them to hurt. And then when something bad happens, you can't help but feel like, did I not prepare them for this? Why did they not listen to me? And we as parents often fail to realize that we create these human beings. They are not extensions of us. They are independent-minded individuals whom will take cues from the culture you raise them in, the society that they're raised in, etc., the values that you try to instill in them, but they'll pretty much do whatever the hell they want, and they'll be their own individual because they are not you. They are themselves. They are wholly separate. And as parents, that's kind of hard to wrap your mind around, especially if things are going poorly for them, but you do have to understand that. It is not your fault how your children act and behave. You can inspire them, nudge them, but they are their own beasts. They get to do whatever the hell they want. Okay, that being said, I get why she feels so bad, Sara Dunstan, about the loss of Steel and how he wasn't listening to her when she was trying to pull him away from the Knights of Takhisis. And she starts to have these dreams that draw her towards this cavern, which reveals a blue dragon that's wounded. His name is Cobalt. And so she slowly starts healing this blue dragon, and they become friends. They end up overhearing about how Knights of Takhisis are actually swarming toward Neraka. Now, this is something that is very troubling because and this is something I didn't even consider during the game, because this period of time, if you think about the game products and the novels, the game products went up until like Blue Day's War in AD&D. And then after that, it was the novels that took it to the Summer of Chaos in the 5th Age. And then the Saga system games after 2nd edition came up and actually implemented 40 years after, that's where it started. 40 years after the Summer of Chaos is when 5th Age started, as far as the game products are concerned in all the novels. And so there's that whole 40 years where you don't really have any sensibility about what's going on in the world from the Chaos War to the Dragon Overlord stopping the Dragon Purge. And so this presents a time in that span where the Knights of Takhisis were believed to have been exterminated entirely. And I never thought of that before. I thought it was a very interesting notion that this book brought up, that in this period of time, because the Knights of Takhisis were what marshaled all of the world in one unified front against Chaos, that they were all slain by the Chaos War. They all died in the rift, in the abyss, in the Northern Korean Ocean. So, like, everyone thought they were gone. And I don't know. For some reason, it struck a chord with me going, oh yeah, that's pretty awesome that all of a sudden these knights are rising again in the absence of the gods. How exactly are they still Knights of Takhisis? Which is, of course, why they ended up adopting the nomenclature of Dark Knights of Krynn. But in any case, the Knights of Takhisis didn't know the gods were going to stay away. They still fervently believed Takhisis was going to come back because they had a personal connection with her through their knighthood from the before the Summer of Chaos, which, you know, it's like a paladin basically being touched by his god, and then suddenly them going, they're like, they'll be back, right? They'll definitely be back. Of course. They're staring at the skies and stars going like, why is this so different? Where's our god? Okay, so anyway, she finds out they're coming back, and after seeing what they did, and of course her firsthand experience with the Knights of Takhisis, she's like, oh, this can't be true. So she wants to go find out if it's actually true or not. She goes to Palanthas, meets with Chrysania, and ends up traveling initially on her own, but then is rescued from conflict by Cobalt the dragon, who is sort of connected to her and is fearful for her and very protective. Cobalt the dragon is very one-dimensional, kind of like a dog in this book, which is a little upsetting because he's a blue freaking dragon. He's an adult blue dragon. And I just felt like he would have more autonomy and power and exert his own will more. But at every step, he just bows down to the whims of Sara Dunstan. And Sara Dunstan's character is really frustrating in this novel because she was never a warrior. She was never a fighter. She was a cook and a nursemaid. That's what she was. A nursemaid. She was not a warrior. But in this, she's whipping ass left and right, taking names. And it just does not add up to the character that we were presented before this. So it's a complete departure from the character from my perspective. And when we're actually presented with her in this, it's saying, you know, she's doing her sword drills and she ends up like getting tips and tricks from other people and stuff. But she's not a trained warrior for life. This is just something, and she's over 50. I am knocking on the door of 50 years old. If I had never done any activities my whole life other than being a nursemaid, there's no way I could stand up against a trained knight. There's no way anyone could. It doesn't matter who you are. And so to think that this normal human being could go up against a knight who was trained their whole life and win? Give me a break. It's just nonsense. And so there's a lot of stuff like that in this that really frustrates me. That aside, I do kind of like a lot of parts of this book. So once she realizes that she's moving towards Neraka to basically spy and see if the Knights of Takhisis are still a thing, and Cobalt rescues her from this sort of combat scenario, they fly over there and they're intercepted by a bunch of other dragons and dragon riders, Knights of Takhisis. So she's sort of brought down to ground level. She lies about who she is. She sort of dyes her hair and everything and changes her haircut, and she's doing her best to try to fake so that they don't realize who she is because she defected, basically from the knighthood. And, they would just kill her on the spot. She meets the Mirielle Abrena, who is the leader of this version of the Knights of Takhisis, who at this time still does believe that Takhisis is going to come back. And she sends knights off on errands to certain locations around Krynn looking for visions to prove that Takhisis is coming back. But she's marshaling the forces and she's trying to rebuild the knighthood. And so she's got a whole bunch of people who have been sort of drawn in or aspirationally want to be knights or are mercenaries who are looking for a steady gig, basically, coming into Neraka, which has been rebuilt and everything and retaken from after the War of the Lance, when the Knights of Solamnia came in, basically cleaned the place up and tried to take control of it. And the Knights sort of reclaimed it after that. In any case, the majority of this story takes place in her training these other Knights of Takhisis because she's kind of stuck there for a minute. And that's the majority of the book, is just her in Neraka training Knights of Takhisis. So why the book is called Legion of Steel when that's not the great preponderance of the content of the book, I do not know. When we get to the end, it's when she founds the order. But until then, it's just her realizing how horrible and effective this knighthood is and being glad that she's not a part of it, and yet being actively a part of it, and then training these soldiers, realizing that she sort of sees them as surrogates to her lost son, Steel, and she's doing her best to teach them honor and the knighthood as it was originally formed, and coming to the realization that that knighthood doesn't exist anymore. The Knights of Takhisis are not honorable beings anymore. They're monsters. And yet, here's the other part that I really don't like. They all act like when they say their word or they make an oath that they must follow it because they are honorable, in the face of all opposition of the story, saying that they aren't honorable. They cannot be trusted for their honor. It even shows a part where they're going to secure a trade route because they're expanding their forces, the Knights of Takhisis. And so they send a wing over to attack a town, and they completely slaughter and burn the town to the ground. Sara is beside herself with grief and shock, and she runs up to the commander like, how could you possibly do this? This isn't honorable. You didn't give them a chance. They just came in and you slaughtered everyone. And he's like, meh, this is how we do it now. And so she goes and tells Mirielle Abrena, like, how do you let these people do this? This is not honorable. This is not what the knighthood is. And she's like, you know what? You're right. And she slaps him on the wrist, and then that's it. That's the whole punishment, is just a slap on the wrist, proving that this is not the honorable knighthood it once was. It is not what it was created to be. How could it be? There is no God. The founder isn't with them anymore. So of course, it's got to change and evolve, and it just descends into darkness like it, sort of sprung from originally, in the absence of those who wanted to keep it as an opposing power to the Knights of Solamnia. And this is just really shocking and stunning to Sara. So it basically gets to a point where she's like, well, I've got to get out of here somewhere, but I've somehow got to bring these knights with me that I've been training because they're really great. They're good human beings. They're not monsters like the rest of the knights are because of the way that she's trained them. And then Mirielle Abrena comes up to her and she's like, hey, so I want you to go to the Tomb of the Last Heroes in Solace, coincidentally, and I want you to see if you can get a vision from Takhisis and then come back and tell us. You can take one knight with you. So she takes this knight, Derek. They're flying all the way back to Abanasinia from Neraka, and she confesses to Derek that she does not want to be a Knight of Solamnia. She's never really wanted it. She only did it to try to draw her son out of it, and he feels like he's been betrayed, so she drops him off in the swamps near Zaxxaroth. She flies back to, at his insistence, then she flies with Cobalt over to Solace, where she goes to the Inn of the Last Tomb of the Last Heroes, and she has this amazing vision of watching Derek meet up with the Knight of Solamnia, raid this Chaos Giants cavern, rescuing kids, and then fighting over treasure, and then both killing each other. And then Steel shows up and gives her the star jewel and says, all we have is each other. And then she wakes up from Kender prodding her outside of the Tomb of the Last Heroes, and she asks the Kender to go get Karaman Majir. He comes, takes her to the Inn of the Last Home, and they have this long conversation about the vision and about what's going on. And Sarah's like, look, I need to go get this Derek Knight because he's going to be killed if this vision is true. And they're like, but you're really hurt and everything. And ultimately they let her go with Cobalt, the blue dragon, fly out there. He's barely alive. The Knight of Solamnia is dead. Conveniently, they get all the treasure. They bring Derek back, nurse him back to health. And then she's like, oh, I have to go back to Neraka so that they don't come looking. So I need to go tell them. But you know what? Before I go, after having this vision of my son, I'm going to start a new order. I'm going to start a whole new knighthood that is actually helping people. Not like the Knights of Solamnia with their code and measure and blind faith. Not like the Knights of Takhisis with their lack of honor and, being monsters. I'm going to do something that's different. And it's going to have to be secret initially. I'm going to create something. And Karaman's like, well, why not call it the Legion of Steel? And she's like, yeah, that's the ticket. So Karaman just like on a whim comes up with the name, which, all right, who cares? It's a thing. Ultimately, she goes back to Neraka, and she is pretty much outright taken into custody because one other rando knight recognizes her for who she is. So she's demands trial by combat against the general who stands up as the champion in the combat. And she fights the General Dragonback, which is what this cover is depicting. And then they win the combat. They go to the ground. She barely ekes out a win. This nursemaid, who has not been trained as a knight ever, is suddenly able to take on a knight general and win. It's the most preposterous thing. And no, that's not the most preposterous. This is the most preposterous thing. She swore, the knight general swore that if Sara defeated her, then she could go and live and escape the order. This whole novel has been presenting these Knights of Takhisis as not honorable. They do not follow their word. They are monsters. They are not the Knights of Takhisis that they were. And yet, the only way Sara can survive this encounter is by trusting their honor and word. And then they follow it. So they are trustworthy. They do have honor. Which is it, book? You can't have it both ways. Either they're not or they are. But when it's convenient for the story, for the heroine of the story to get away, yeah, suddenly they all follow their honor and all the knights listen to their general in this one instance on this one case. And at the very end, she flies off. The general's like, you better watch yourself because we're going to come after you. And she's like, you need to understand who you're talking to. I'm the leader of the Legion of Steel, and we will be against you at all times. Why in that moment did not the general go up and put her sword through Sara Dunstan's stomach? She could have. She let her away, as she said. If she's not an honorable being, like they've been saying this whole story, why didn't she just kill her right then? It makes no sense. None of this makes any logical sense. It's so frustrating when you have elements of a story that you really appreciate, and then suddenly they completely blow up the rules that they've presented to you and do their own damn thing. Another part that kind of bugs me about this, and it's always bugged me about Dungeons and Dragons when people rule it this way, but if you're a red dragon or a blue dragon or whatever dragon you are, you're immune to your own breath weapon. I know this because they breathe it out of their bodies. If they could not breathe it out of their bodies, I mean, if they were not immune to it, they would die as soon as they started breathing it, because the flames would, cover their bodies from the inside out, cooking them, or the lightning would shock them from generating it. Like, they're clearly immune to their own breath weapon. And so you're telling me that another blue dragon who's shooting the same lightning at you, you're now vulnerable to as another blue dragon? That doesn't make any sense. You're either immune to it or you are not. But to say it's like a different brand, like, oh no, this lightning is this creature's lightning, and it's slightly different than your lightning, which is why your lightning doesn't affect you, but their lightning does. Get the F out of here. It's the stupidest thing ever. So yeah, this stuff drives me insane. Just keep a little bit of lore consistency. That's all I'm asking. A little bit of consistency. And if you're going to make up rules, follow the damn rules that you made up. But you can't just be willy-nilly picking and choosing what works, because then it breaks down the entire world itself. All right. In any case, that's the ending of the book. She brings all the knights that were training with her, except for one. They decide to join her with this Legion of Steel. And so they all go off to Solace, and that's where the headquarters of the Legion of Steel is going to start up. And that's it. That's the end. So the whole book was about Sara Dunstan realizing the Knights of Takhisis were still a thing, realizing they're still a very dire threat, and that the Knights of Slamnia cannot stand up against them, and then realizing that she wants to do something that actually helps all people, and that she has to do it in secret, and so that's where the Legion of Steel comes from. All of the flaws and all my complaints about this book aside, I really did enjoy the ending, and I loved her reminiscing about Steel and how the love and the care that he has for her as a surrogate mother, all of that hit home. It was really, really great, and I felt like her actions in his memory were valid. And while I don't agree with her abilities and capabilities, I did like what she ultimately did. And I thought the Legion of Steel was a really interesting trope to bring up that had never existed in Dragonlance before, except for the 5th Age Dramatic Game Supplement, the Saga system rules. And me and my friends played the hell out of that 5th Age Saga system. and played Legion of Steel characters in some cases. And even in the Tyranny of Dragons live play 5th edition, 2024 edition version of the game we're going to be getting back to in November, they're part of the Legion of Steel. So it is really nice seeing how the Legion formed and came together, even though I knew the story, just reading and hearing the narrative of it, it was really interesting. So that's my review. Chris, tough act to follow after Spirit of the Wind, but ultimately successful in telling the origin of Legion of Steel. Yep. You thought the first third of the book could have been condensed into one chapter. Not much happened, 100%. You love Blue Dragons and Dragonlance. The idea of loyal henchmen is great. It just made me think of a dog, and I think dragons need to be feared and heralded as mystic creatures of doom and destruction that they are, of ultimate power. And that's just not how they were portrayed in this at all. Sara's affection to the soldiers under her command was the heart of the book. I totally agree with that aspect. It's something that, if you're lucky enough to serve in the military and you have a commander or a non-commissioned officer over you that actually cares about you and the job they're doing, you'll understand what that means. But those people, in my experience, were so few and far between in my duty stations that it almost seems like it couldn't ever be real because they were so shitty when I was in. So for those who had good leaders, I bet they definitely connected with that idea. People like to ignore the truth in order to dehumanize the enemy. Even in an evil army, there's still plenty of good people, often young adults that are just victims of circumstance. Yeah, and the real, just because we are products of our environment, if you are taught your whole life to hate something, then you're going to hate that thing just sort of out of habit. But then you're going to have experience with that thing and realize that, oh, it's not what I was told at all. And then as a rational thinking human being, you then change your perspective. You change your opinion. You no longer hate them because you realize there was nothing to justify that hate. It was just a cultural thing. We see it all over in our culture. And it's why we have, in my opinion, younger generations going in specific political directions, because they just think that that's the way to go. That's what all their online influencers are saying and doing. So that must be the right way. And what they're going to do ultimately, in the best cases, are realize how flawed that logic is and to rely on your own personal experience, not what you're told to think, but use your own personal experience to guide your perspectives. Once you do that, you don't have to live in hate and bigotry because you realize that's not what the world is about. That's just what people want you to think so they can divide you. So yeah, and I totally see it in this fantasy setting as well. You found the ending beautiful, the idea of overcoming the hardest loss in life could ever provide, the death of a child, make your life even more meaningful and memorable. It was a beautiful ending. Turning tragedy into something of substance, I think, is a beautiful thing. And the fact that they use that as a hook in this for this Legion's formation is genuinely beautiful. Hey, Engine Joe, how you doing? Thanks for tuning in. No Honor Among Thieves. Yep, that's right. Sithros, how you doing? Thanks for tuning in. Remember this book you haven't read in like 20 years? I just finished it this week for the first time. Bridge of Time series wasn't your favorite, but there were a few gems in the mix. Yeah, 100%. I thought the very first one was great. I thought this one was okay. I'm not looking forward to the next one. It's called Silver Stair, I think. It's about Goldmoon founding the Citadel of Light. I think with Blistered Top Knot, but it might be with a different dwarf. In any case, I'm just not really looking forward to it. But to be fair, I wasn't looking forward to this at all either. I was like, I already know the story of the Legion of Steel. How is this going to be interesting? But the author made it interesting, if a little flawed, but still interesting. So maybe the next one will be the same. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. All right. You always thought the Legion of Steel was the closest thing to a neutral evil path, something akin to a foot soldier. Oh, wow. I never saw it that way. I always saw it as like a true neutral spy ring. They just did what they had to do to protect people regardless of the consequences or regardless of what the laws are. So I just always saw it as like this neutral thing. But that's interesting. You saw it as a neutral evil path. Hey, Tarek, how you doing? Thanks for tuning in live. You never liked the idea of Steel Brightblade. Sturm and Kitty R having a son is something totally out of character for Sturm. Yeah. It was a very odd narrative choice when they first did it. I've come around and accepted it, by now, some like 25, 30 years later, whatever it was. But when it happened, I was like, all right, well, Steel Brightblade is a young, impressionable young man. You've got this hot piece of ass coming on to him. Would he have a moment of weakness as a man? I kind of think he would, in enough pressure, enough time is going to make a diamond, and it might get you laid. So I feel like he made a mistake, and I think he made a mistake. And he didn't know he had to live with it until he was dead. But it is interesting, Kitiara, how she came back for her brothers. Why would she not come back for her son, her own son, to have as her second in command? Like, why would she never come back for that? That is what really threw me off. I can't imagine. And again, every parent has to deal with this when they have decide to have children, or when they find out that they're pregnant. You have to make the decision first: am I keeping it? And second, what's the quality of life that I'm going to be able to provide this child? And third, is that worth me keeping the child if I cannot take care of it properly? And you have to make the most difficult of any possible decision to give that child to someone else. And that can never be looked on as something that's easy or simple or flippant. It is a horribly, horribly difficult conversation and experience to go through. And so if I just extrapolate that to the character of Kitiara, she doesn't live like that. She is very much me. All I care about is my own life. Out of sight, out of mind. Maybe that's the reason that she didn't go back for her kid. But for me, I just can't rationalize a question like that. I just can't do it. It would just be too difficult. All right, so it's the problem you had with the Fifth Age era. They had a lot of books written in this era, but did everyone check them to see if they were consistent? Man, I don't think so. I really don't think so. I think because at this point, in Fifth Age, what they did was they took all of the second and first edition and novel lore and sort of started building on it. Primarily by Douglas Niles, to be fair, but they started building on Dragonlance to, build out the Age of Starbirth, where the dragons came from. They really started to define this world that we only kind of knew in chunks before the Fifth Age came out. So they had a lot of filling in of gaps to do, and I think they did really, really well. And it was the Fifth Age content that, when formatted for the third edition of D&D by Margaret Weiss Production and Sovereign Press, respectively, came out with the best Dragonlance source books ever. But it was only because of the work that the Fifth Age did in creating the lore. So you have to kind of nod your head in appreciation to the Fifth Age, if for no other reason than building out the lore of Dragonlance, because that's where the great preponderance of it happened, to be fair. And the novels sort of played with that as well, shifting and adjusting things. Like every iteration of AD&D and Dragonlance core products, they all shifted and changed a little bit for the setting itself, as we saw in even the most recent releases. So I get that they have to do it, even though it frustrates me as someone who tries to have consistency in lore. Azilla's, thanks for tuning in. How you doing? When this came out, you were struck by what was the emphasis on what we've been doing isn't working. Everything has gone wrong. Let's try something new without abandoning the spirit of what it meant. Yeah, I think that's really interesting take as well. And I totally agree. You could say that about the creators of Dragonlance, meaning TSR/Wizards of the Coast. And you could say that about the actual characters in the story as well. So it fits in both cases, I think. And Duteous Priest, how you doing, man? Thanks for tuning in. Being a spy as a sort of neutral evil James Bond was not squeaky clean. Yeah, for sure. You're right. Great builds walls. Guilt builds walls for sure. Agreed to kill someone even to serve a greater good with little remorse and thinking inward to use the behavior of neutral evil. I think that tracks. The lore was already there. Most of it was consistent in the modules and had not been written about except in small reference like Taladas. The lore of the history of Krynn was suggested at, absolutely. And they had timelines, but it wasn't built out the way that Douglas Niles did with the dragons, for example, with the Scions, and everything. I mean, the Scions first came out in the Dwarves of Krynn with the second edition box set, but they really honed it all in and put a nice bow on it in the 5th edition. I'm sorry, not 5th edition, in 5th Age of Krynn products with the Saga system rules, which is why I really appreciate the Saga system personally. All right, so if you like Dragonlance in the Age of Mortals era, you should read this book. If you liked Steel Brightblade and Sara Dunstan's dynamic and what that meant with the Knights of Takhisis, or you like the Knights of Takhisis, you should definitely check out this book. And if you want to hear about the formation of the Legion of Steel, I definitely recommend you check out this book. It has got flaws. It is not the best, but it is pretty good. And it's got some really heart-filled moments. And if you are a leader in your life, or if you have children, I think you could garner something from this. So I think it's worth your time if you fall into those particular zones. All right, that is it for my review of Legacy of Steel by Mary H. Herbert. What did you think of the formation of the Legion of Steel? Do you think Sara Dunstan was too powerful? And finally, why didn't the Dark Knights just kill her, as they clearly didn't have honor? Feel free to email me at info@dlsaga.com or leave a comment below. I would like to take a moment and remind you to subscribe to this YouTube channel, click the like button, and ring that bell. All of it goes to help other Dragonlance fans learn about this channel and its content. And this channel is all about celebrating the wonderful world of the Dragonlance Saga. Thank you so much for joining in that celebration. So, until next time, my name is Adam for Dragonlance Saga. Slán Javar.